Shah first discovered Khadi 50 years ago when he went to India and volunteered with the Sarvodaya movement there. Movement for autonomy. Khadi was an integral part of Sarvodaya there, and Kishore Bhai's later work as an international development consultant has been guided by his experience as a Sarvodaya volunteer. He co-founded Khadi London 5 years ago. Kishore Bhai, over to you.
Okay. Yeah, so as Rohit said, when I started my Khadi career about 50 years ago, it was about, and I think that's what I'm going to narrate. I started working with Sarvodaya and Khadi 50 years ago. Then I diverted a little bit and came back very strongly to Khadi about 6 years ago. So I'll try and narrate my story in that sequence. The structure of my presentation is that the first is what was happening 50 years on compared to what's happening when I started Khadi London. Some key differences were there. So I'll go through that. Some of it was disappointing, some of it was encouraging. And then I hooked on to the part which was encouraging, which was looking at innovations which were happening in the field. And I was surprised at how many were happening. And then I'll go on to look at some of those innovations. I won't talk more about Gopuri because Karuna will be talking about it later, and about Jatin Trust and Beaverbird because they'll be talking about it. But I'll talk about a few others just to give an idea of how things are changing in the area of Khadi and how they changed rapidly in the last 2 or 3 years. Then based on this, what is happening, we have come across a principle called the 3Ds. It's decentralization. Prapti, next slide, please. Next slide. Yeah, so I'll talk about the common thread which I found in all these innovations. That they're all decentralized. There was an element of democracy and diversity. So that's what we are trying to build on, and I'll talk about that. Then I'll talk about a unique story where the West meets East, which has fascinated me because my own double background being in the West and having grown up in the West and then gone to the East. Next slide, Prapti. Yeah, so when I went to India 50 years ago, I discovered the Sarvodaya movement. I'd been a part of the students' movement in US around civil rights, around the Vietnam War, and generally around changes that were needed in society. There's something called Students for Participatory Democracy. And I found the Sarvodaya movement resonated with that. And Khadi was an integral part of that. And the Khadi that I saw at that time, I joined an ashram. I started going to it first and then joined it in Indore. And they had a small Khadi unit, something like maybe 20 feet by 50 feet long. But everything was done there, right from spinning, right from ginning, carding, roving, spinning, and the fabric was made as well. But all the processes leading up to Khadi yarn were done there. And the spinning was not done in the shed, but it was farmed out to people living in industrial slums in Indore. So they would come every week, collect the slivers, come and hand over the yarn they had made. So if you look at the picture on the left, it's something very similar in terms of how the slivers are made. Slivers are the part which then go on to make the thread, the yarn, for making cotton. So the photo is not from Indore, it's from Gopuri, but it's a very similar setup. It was very small, could be done where the cotton was grown. It was the case in Indore. The cotton came from a nearby place. It wasn't baled. One thing I've discovered is that baling cotton, you lose the quality of cotton. What I found when I started working on Khadi, that instead of those small units, India now has 6 and maybe going on to 8 very large roving plants. You can see it at the the bottom right corner there. And this supply slivers to all parts of India. So you might be growing cotton in Gujarat, but you have to get the slivers from Madhya Pradesh, which is, I think parts of it could be about 500, 600 miles away. Similarly, it's not what I would call Khadi. It's a highly industrialized process. It's not done where the farmers are there. It loses, because it has to be baled from distances, it loses that quality. It may be more efficient, more viable in some ways, but not what I would have liked Khadi to be. That was one disappointing part. The other thing was, because of this whole centralized process that was taking place in Khadi, you had some very large unit Khadi organizations coming up, growing fast, but then the smaller ones were just dropping off. But many of them just no longer exist. There was a centralization process within Khadi industry. It was no longer anywhere near to what Gandhi would have liked to see it. But as I say, that's one part of the story. The other part is that some of the old things still survive, and some people are experimenting. Modified BT cotton, but they retain their indigenous cotton. All the processing, as you can see, is very manual, using tools rather than even machines. The ginning is done. In the second picture, you can see the ginning being done. Third picture is the carding, and it's something which is not replicated everywhere, but which has been kept there. But what's happening is that kind of hand spinning, not using a mechanized charkha, mechanized spinning, is being done elsewhere also now. So next slide.
Yeah.
There's a designer who studied at National Institute of Design in India, P.N. Satish. So he has been working in different parts of India, trying to introduce a small portable, what we call a petty charkha or a book charkha. And what he has found is that even though the incomes might not be great, the women that he has introduced it, they like it because it gives them a chance to come out, to earn some money and start getting a voice in the household. So it's an old technology that works in some places, and I think that's what should be adopted in these places. But the other thing, when Satish started, he was first fascinated by the charkha, but then he started looking at how the cotton, what was the effect of the different kinds of cotton on the final product. And he has come out with a hierarchy that is shared in another webinar. So the best cotton is perennial cotton, which is very little of it is left. So we know about Dhaka muslin that was done with perennial cotton. Then the second one, which also is again pretty much disappeared but reviving, fortunately, is indigenous organic cotton. And we found that when we started 6 years ago, there was hardly any organic cotton available, at least for Khadi. But now a lot of groups around the country are looking at trying to revive the old seeds they had, because they're seeing what the modern seeds, the genetically modified seeds have done to the cotton industry. So they started reviving that. And the third one is organic cotton, which is not from an indigenous seed, but from hybrid cotton. I think that's what Jatan Trust is using in Gujarat. And he said the worst is BT cotton. And about 80% or more of the cotton in India now is BT cotton. So in terms of the quality of cotton lending itself to better quality yarn and fabric, BT comes out way at the bottom. So I think that's the other thing that we found. That the next thing is how just examples of how the organic cotton area is growing. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Yeah, so I then started coming across different examples, which were moving away slightly from what the Khadi institution in at the central government would have said, KVIC. They would have liked their slavers to be used and then spun in what they uh, identified as hand spinning, which wasn't exactly hand spinning in many cases because it's a small version of a industrial spinning machine that is mostly used now. So there's a group called Dastakar, and it's done a lot of work with handloom weavers. And the Dastakar unit in Andhra Pradesh started experimenting with old Khadi roving plants which had been discarded, and tried to revive them. They found that they had problems, tinkered with it, and finally came up with something which is Khadi and not Khadi. The spinning process is more mechanized than Khadi would like it, but it's done from unbaled cotton, local variety, organic, and then it's spun. Then there's because of the unbaled cotton and the way they develop the machinery, it comes out as a very fine yarn, and they have been able to produce what they call it malka. Malka is probably, I think, coming from Malma, which is very fine fabric, and ka is khadi, and it's very expensive, very popular. They've been able to replicate the model into at least I think 3 or 4 different centers, and there's a huge demand for it. So I think there's an area. What has happened in India since about 100 years, there's been a big divide between khadi and handloom. Handloom using mill yarn and khadi using hand-spun yarn. But I think this is where we're able to bring the two together. Instead of mill yarn, it was a mechanized yarn, but it was done locally. And after a lot of experimentation with the spinning process, with the weavers, working with both, and this is what they came. So to me, and this is the work where the 3 democratic diversity and decentralization is when I was reading an account of them. And I would recommend, if you're interested in this subject, to read a book called A Freight History, The Journey of Cotton in India. It looks at the cotton seeds and it also looks at the whole Malka experiment. Next slide, please. And very similarly, just by accident, we came across another group called Khamir, and their story is also very interesting. It's in a desert area. There's an 5,000-year-old variety of cotton. It's called Vagad, and they were able to. It was under threat. There was some cultivation going on at the beginning of the century, but there was a threat coming because irrigation water was coming into Kutch, and that meant that a lot of people were shifting from their indigenous cotton to the BT variety. Also, there was a threat because the prices for the cotton made from Vagad was very low. So they started a number of things. One thing was they made sure that the whole cotton growing with the indigenous seed was organic. They got the organic certification. Then they did a rebranding. Vagad became Kala cotton, and now it's one of the most popular cotton variety in London anyway. We sell a lot of Kala cotton fabrics. And then there was a lot of intervention. They got designers to help the weavers make new designs. And also get over the stigma that coarse fabric is not very good. It's coarse because it's grown in desert area. It's got a different feel to it. I like it. And I think most of the designers I'm working with, they like it here. So I think that's another area where by just stepping aside from very traditional view of Khadi, they came into something different, very unique. And now they're gone on to go back to the very, the simple one spindle box charka. And in parts of Gujarat, they're doing Khadi. But Khadi, it helped them to get to that stage. They had this intervening area where they used a mill. They supported a local mill to make the local spinning mill to cut so that they could use the very tough, short, very stable quality of cotton they had, and they helped with the working capital so that the farmers were sure they could sell the crop to the mill, and then they worked with the weavers to work with that particular yarn away from the mill yarn they were used to. So I think that's another example of how things are moved in India, and by stepping away from a very traditional Khadi organization, which is very bureaucratic, often controlled from the center. They didn't worry about certification, they just went ahead. They don't even call it Khadi, but I think it's one of the very positive examples. And there are many in the country right now, similar examples. In southern India, you have Tula, which is again working with farmers who decide to grow organic cotton. And next slide. Prapti. So if you see on the picture on the top right there, that's what's most commonly used now. It's a multi-spindle, what I was saying, a mini model of a spinning machine found in the industrial areas. It has helped in going from single spindle to multi-spindle so that people earn more, but it's very strenuous. There have been lots of reports about health hazards posed by that. Women like to work on it because it provides a big income, it gives them something to do, it gives them empowerment, but there are issues with it. So there has been, in the last, I think, 3 or 4 years especially, a move towards energizing those same charkhas with solar energy or similar charkhas. There's somebody called Kishore Shah in Gujarat. He has been working with an idea of having the whole process from cotton to the fabric done through solar energy in a cluster of villages. And he has worked on the spinning yarns. If it's successful, the yarn would be better. And his calculations are that if this succeeds, the earnings of the spinners will go up by almost 60 to 80%, and the cost of Khadi will come down, maybe half or maybe a little more than that, but make it more viable in the market. So that's another model very different from the first one I talked about, where they were using very simple, basic tools for spinning. And so I think that each one of these models can have a role to play, depending on what the situation is. It has to be worked out, what works in which area. And but next slide, Prapti. Prapti. So one of the common thing in all this, right from the basic tools to the highly solarized, they're even talking about 36 spindle solar charkhas now. So if one person can work on 2 of those, they'll be managing 72 spindles. So right from working on 1 spindle to 72 spindles, there are different models coming up depending on situations, depending on who is managing it, who is driving it, depending on what the local people want. But the 3 things that I find common in all of this is they're all decentralized. Some of it are based on the region, like what Karuna will talk about is the Vidarbha region they're working in. Some are very cluster specific, a number of villages. And another very important thing in all of this innovations which are taking place is that there's maximum value addition at source. The other thing is they're all diverse. So you have diversity in seeds. People are moving away from BT cotton seeds, which is 85, 88, 90% of cotton growing in India, but which require higher investments and are running into increasing problems with pest problems, which if you use local variety, they're less likely to happen. And most of them are democratic. They're trying to give more power to the cotton farmers, to the spinners, to the weavers. And this is where we feel that this could be a way of going forward. Next slide. Prapti, next slide. Yeah, this could be a way of going forward, not just for fabric production using cotton in India. Could be for wool in India, could be for silk, but it could be anywhere in the world. And one of the things we've done since 4 years since we started is look at the idea of Khadi not just as something coming as a fabric coming from India, but as something which you can do in UK using UK fibers. And there's a group which we have been able to connect with, which has a similar interest. And we had 2 workshops called Festival of Natural Fibers. Both of them have looked at this issue in quite a depth. Next slide. Prapti. So it's again the 3Ds, and the last festival we had, we got this infographics. So it's very similar problems. There's a disconnect between the farmers and the market. There's a disconnect between the mechanization. The sheep, for example, in UK, it used to be mainly be raised for fabrics, for the woolen fabrics. That has shifted now, since cotton became popular. It's shifted to being raised for meat. It's a very different kind of sheep, so you don't get very good wool. Hand-bent flax used to be major fabrics in UK again before cotton. So there's an attempt to revive that. So it's a similar thing what is happening in India, but with different fibers, with different fabrics. It's happening in UK, it's picking up force. There's a movement called Fiber Shed, which is in the US, with lots of chapters bringing craftsmen and farmers together. There are 3 fiber sheds in UK now. So I think there's a common thread here. It's not just about India, it's not just about, it's something India can give in terms of a philosophy, in terms of a concept which takes us away from both socialism and capitalism. It's more localized, it gives powers to the people, local people, and it creates production systems which I think are going to be very relevant in the post-COVID era now as we go through that. It's something we need to learn from what happened here. We need to be much more self-dependent at every level. And I think Khadi is providing that, that vision. Next slide. Okay, so we have been looking at, as Khadi London, we've been dealing mainly in fabrics, but we have started looking at products. And as we've been doing that, we're trying to look for products which are very, which would cater to a Western market, because we're based in UK. We're not looking at the Indian market. And one of the things which, has fascinated me in 5 years is the Khadi denim. It has a huge market, potential market. It started, different people started experimenting with the idea of Khadi denim. It was picked up by an industrial house called Arvind, which are the denim kings in India. And it was trying to transfer a technology and a fabric from the West to a technology and fabric of the East. They're very different. If you can look at the photo at the bottom, it's a different texture. And I think this is kind of a way forward in terms of how do we universalize this whole concept, but also how do we cater to a modern market, both in the East and the West. And denim, when I went to India, nobody wore jeans. They used to make fun of me saying that, oh, is he wearing pockets or go-downs? But after that, jeans became very popular. And then I stopped wearing jeans because I was wearing Khadi, and there was no Khadi denim available at the time. But then, there was a point where I shifted back to my jeans. The denim then was being manufactured in India rather than coming from the US. And I would go to my tailor. He would have a whole selection of denim, would fit me up. So my own personal attire became jeans and Khadi kurta. So denim has been a long part of my life, and this fascinates me on how. So Arvind has taken a lead, but then lots of smaller makers, both fabric makers and designers, have taken up to Khadi denim in their own way. And the latest thing that I've come across is the organic Khadi denim from Udyog Bharati. And I think Medha will be speaking later as a big part in that development. Yeah, next slide. So I'll just sum it up with an infographic that we came up with when we had our first event about 4 years ago. So Khadi, to that group, which had just been introduced to Khadi in a way, it was a new identity. It was a heritage. It could be a heritage in India in terms of heritage going back to 5,000 years ago. Also a heritage going to the freedom movement. But in UK, it could be a heritage of, local wool. It's something with the younger generation is aiming for. You can see it much more now in the movement for climate change, which is being led by the young. It's just an element of transparency. And to make this succeed, you really need to have a strong ethical spine. And these are the things coming out of that. And you need to look at technology afresh. And the technology has changed. It's now much more possible to get decentralized technology, much more easier, and which can be viable than it was even 10 years ago. So let's make use of it. So, and it's based around people. So I think this is what sums up Khadi to me, and the way Khadi I see is developing both in the East and the West. Next slide. Next slide is thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Kishore, for